All right, so I put through an OPD in the last Senate sitting for a couple of key documents and figures from the government. I've got the OPD information back through that process, and what it appears to me is that if you add up a couple of the reforms that the government has framed as anti-fraud, which are primarily, and again I'm interested in whether I've read this correctly, plan management and support coordination changes, particularly the commissioning pieces that you've spoken about, differentiated pricing for unregistered providers, mandatory registration and ministerial decision-making in relation to pricing and fraud measures. If you pull those together, given the values you've assigned them in the OPD you've provided, we get to about $5 billion more broadly in terms of the overall amount that the government has forecast you will be cutting from the NDIS in the next 4 years or so. That total is $37.8 billion. So $5 billion of the $37.8 billion are attributable, in my interpretation, to measures that you've framed as anti-fraud measures. Is that analysis correct?
Well, Senator, I think the starting point, which is that all of these measures are anti-fraud measures, is not quite accurate. Many of the measures you refer to go to what I would describe as the objective would be to improve the performance of the market. In the particular example of plan managers, there are some particular concerns we have about the role that some plan managers are playing in the system in relation to fraud. But many of the other measures that you indicated, their purpose is actually to improve the service quality or improve the cost effectiveness of the market.
Okay. Do you have the OPD table in front of you that outlines the reform items and the amount of money that you intend to allocate to those in terms of the cuts and savings? All right. Okay, so I just want to get this clear because it's actually quite useful for the community more broadly. So where we've got item 3, for example, plan management and support coordination reforms, are you saying that would not be correct to characterise that as an anti-fraud measure?
It is, but that is not its only objective, Senator.
Okay, all right. And then if we go to, say, item 8, differentiated pricing for unregistered providers, would that be described as an anti-fraud measure?
Well, officials may wish to contribute to this, but principally, no. Its purpose is not to address fraud, it's to improve the functioning of the market and to deliver better value, better quality services for participants. Okay.
If we look then at item, if we look at the item around unregistered providers, would that be one that you would describe as a mandatory registration of providers? Is that an anti-fraud measure?
Again, I think it has a dual purpose, Senator, and you heard me say in my opening remarks that where we see fraud, we often see poor quality services and, in the very worst cases, exploitation and abuse. Mandatory registration offers the opportunity to improve safeguarding and to improve the quality of services that are offered to participants.
If I may just add on that one, Senator, just to illustrate that point, and Ms Glanville may want to comment. We probably think there's 4 main things that registration gives you. The first is genuine safety, potentially quality safety. The second is actually oversight of quality that's not necessarily safety but has other quality aspects. The third is market information, just us knowing what's happening in the market. And the fourth is the category you're talking about, which is control of fraud. We would see registration can address all of those things.
Okay. So then we have a budget where we've got about, as I said, $38.7 billion that you've forecast to cut from the scheme over the forward estimates. Based on your answers, we've got far less than about $5 billion of that overall amount of money is directly attributable to anti-fraud measures, with the rest coming from cuts to people's plans, supports, the services delivered to participants on the scheme, rather than actually impacting the large fraudulent provider. Is that correct?
Senator, it's a good question, and I'm pleased you're asking it because I'm asked it often. When people assert that there are savings to government available from tackling fraud, it misses a key point. Mostly what occurs when we tackle fraud is that money that is being diverted away from participants who need those resources is returned to them. So we intervene to deal with fraud and integrity questions largely because we are concerned about the impact of those behaviours on participants. We intervene in those issues to deal with fraud, non-compliance and integrity because we think the community needs to retain confidence in the proper functioning of the scheme. You are correct that for the most part there are not significant savings to government. There are some savings to government when we intervene, but mostly what occurs is an improvement of outcomes for people with disability who need support.
Going on the answers that you've given today and on the information of the OPD, you've confirmed to the Parliament that there will be $38.7 billion cut from the scheme over the forward estimates, and that less than $5 billion of that amount of money will come from anything that could be described as an anti-fraud measure. So the vast majority of what we've got here in this budget are cuts made to participants, impacting them rather than impacting the large private providers who are the primary perpetrator of fraud in the system. So we have a wildly disproportionate impact falling on people who are doing nothing wrong, rather than falling on the providers, the large private providers who are doing something wrong. And yet your government is talking a lot about fraud in selling this legislation. But actually what you've just told me is it's mostly about cuts to people's plans.
Senator, your question misunderstands the evidence I've just provided. There will be very significant impacts on providers who seek to take money from people with a disability. That is the purpose of the fraud measures, and I can ask officials from the NDIA to step through those at a future point. We have many hours together. We do expect very significant impacts in this regard by way of the measures we're proposing. However, in terms of savings to government, intervening to prevent fraud, as I have already explained, generally returns money to people with disability who need it, not to consolidated revenue.
Yeah, so in terms of talking about the dollars...
which is to say it's wrong to say that there will be no impacts on providers.
Yeah, but in terms of the dollars, because we're talking about the budget, we're talking about people's funding, the vast majority of the cuts you're making are to people's services and supports, the therapies, the support hours that they need to leave the house to maybe connect with their community, find and keep work. This is where the cuts are coming. And your own government's figures, the OPD information that I've just quoted to you, shows that far less than $5 billion, which is not even 10% of the overall value of the cuts that are being made in the budget, actually come from things that you would describe as anti-fraud measures. In fact, if I take it back to the OPD, the only one that you were able to specifically describe as that even mentions the word fraud is the making of the minister, giving the minister the power to set pricing and take unilateral action in relation to fraud. That's less than $1 billion in the overall scheme of things.
Senator, your question incorrectly conflates two things. the package as a whole will have a very significant impact on fraud. And given the tenor of your questioning, I might ask officials to step through the investments that are proposed and the impact we expect it will have. We have to deal with fraud.
I agree.
But as I have said on a number of occasions now, when we do so, we don't see significant savings to government. We see better outcomes for participants. And I think you would agree that we have to do those things for those outcomes. We don't do it for fiscal purposes. We do it to deal with the harm that arises for participants when fraud goes unchecked.
Yep, I'm well aware of that, Minister, and I do not need to hear from the Fraud Fusion folks at this point in the day. As I hope you would be aware, as a disabled person, I am fully aware that fraud impacts disabled people. It impacts us most directly. We are the ones who lose the services when the fraud occurs, and it has been my role in the Parliament and the Greens' role in the Parliament to champion anti-fraud measures. And we've done that consistently, and I am a proud member of the current inquiry into fraud within the scheme, and we have heard consistently in that inquiry that it is the large private provider that is the primary perpetrator of fraud, and that is where reform is most certainly needed. The point that I am making is if you look at the actual cuts you are making and think about the impact that will have on people's lives, the burden and the weight of these reforms sit with the disabled people and our families, the participants, the victim of the fraud, rather than measures which will impact the perpetrator of the fraud, the large provider. That is my point.
Well, the thing is that is incorrect, and it misunderstands the
that's what the numbers say.
It misunderstands the investment. You conflate the fiscal impact of the package with the overall policy impact of the package. The package contains very significant investments to tackle fraud wherever we see it, including where we see providers perpetrating fraud against disabled people. And we expect that to be significant, and it's important. But we didn't design that to return savings to government. We designed those interventions to ensure that people who are assigned resources to support them living their best life as a person with disability actually receive those supports. That is the purpose of that intervention. If you designed it to return money to government, it would have the practical effect of taking money away, and that's not the purpose of those interventions.
I think many people will look at the dollar figures and wonder why they themselves, as participants in the scheme, are bearing the overwhelming weight of the cuts that you are making. In a piece of legislation that you've overwhelmingly framed as an anti-fraud measure, and yet the only specific things that your documents detail are a less than $1 billion saving. I'm quite surprised. I came into this estimate session prepared to kind of take the government's rhetoric at its face value and assign each of these 4 areas of so-called reform as having some impact, in your view, on fraud. And so that would bring you to about a $5 billion figure, leaving $33 billion left over that are coming from participants. But you haven't even been able to confirm that. So I think there is a fundamental disconnect here between the government's language, which is often around tackling fraud, and what the numbers say here in the budget papers and in this OPD answer. But I don't want to push the Chair's goodwill today, so early in the morning. I suspect I've been going for more than 15 minutes at this point, Chair.
I was about to ask you if you would be willing to rotate.
I am very willing to rotate, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Steele-John.
Chair, before we do, because I think it is germane to the point being made here, and I noticed that Mr Dardo's at the table, and I know that you said you didn't want to hear from the Fraud Fusion Task Force.
I'm waiting for him later, so I'll take them in the later block.
But can I just make a point, and maybe we'll come back to it?
Yeah.
I think Mr Dardo has given quite a lot of evidence in this committee before about the if you like, the ratio of what you can book as fraud versus other activities that have adverse effects that we would not be able to pursue. And I think we just put a place marker there because that's a
and he's given
very
evidence to that
important
effect in an inquiry hearing, and I have questions on that later in the programme.
Okay.
But I think it's not correct, Senator Steele-John, to assert, as you've done, that this package doesn't tackle fraud. There is $207 million over 5 years to make sure that the Fraud Fusion Task Force is ongoing. There is supplementary funding over 3 years of $73 million for the NDIA payment integrity workforce to continue. There is new funding of $358 million over 5 years to enhance integrity for the payment system. These are very significant interventions that will benefit people with disability who should not be exploited by providers doing the wrong thing.
Minister, to be very, very clear with the government and with yourself, disabled people are not silly. We've lived and died by what decision government does and doesn't make in relation to the NDIS for over a decade, and before that, the various different schemes that did or did not work. And we've come to understand that when it comes to budget rhetoric and government policy, one of the most effective ways to understand intent is to follow the money. And so what the community is doing, and what I'm doing here on their behalf, is following the money as detailed in your documents presented to the Senate in response to my OPD, which demonstrate that far less than $5 billion of the overall amount of money that is placed and bookmarked as going back to the budget from NDIS cuts come from anti-fraud measures.
Senator Steele-John, do you not accept the evidence that fraud largely doesn't deliver tackling fraud doesn't deliver fiscal savings? I'm struggling to understand your logic because, as I've said a number of times now, when we tackle fraud, the saving goes to the participant rather than to government. That's why you don't see those numbers in the budget, Senator.
To be very fair to you, Minister, there is quite a gap in your legislation where we would expect tangible, serious anti-fraud measures to be. It's one of the more surprising elements of a bill delivered in a context where fraud has been so much part of the conversation. It's been noted not only by myself but across the Parliament that there's been a lot of rhetoric around anti-fraud and a lot of focus on it. And while we welcome the focus, we question why there is so little substance in this bill when it comes to anti-fraud measures. So I do believe that you could have done more in the budget to tackle fraud and to hold these absolute mongrel providers to account for the abuse and exploitation that they are viciously perpetrating upon disabled people. They're no better than criminals, many of them, and they are financially exploiting disabled people. But your budget tells the Parliament that actually when it comes to things that will get some of that money back, you've put far more focus on cutting people's support hours and the funding in their plan than you have holding these people to account. But I did say that I would rotate the chair back a while ago, so I will do that at this point.
Thank you, Senator Steele-John.
I think the practical consequence of making a long statement that includes information that's inaccurate means I really do have to respond. Schedule 2 of the bill creates a whole range of new powers for the NDIA, explicitly enabling them to target fraud. It is a very important schedule, and I am surprised that more attention has not been paid to it, Senator. The second, I have indicated to you also the scale of the investment that the government is making to ensure that the NDIA and the Commission have the resources that they need to tackle fraud. But we've been clear, Senator, with the community, and Minister Butler was clear in his speech at the outset. The reforms do also work to tackle sustainability and runaway cost growth. We're really clear about that and upfront about that, and we do this because we believe that it is in the interests of people with disability that the scheme retain community confidence, be sustainable, and be here for the long term.
Thank you. I know.
But I want to rotate. So.
And I appreciate that, Senator Steele-John. Thank you.
Authorised by J. Steele-John, Australian Greens, Canberra.